as Brandon said, we're going to talk about something, to coin a phrase, now for something completely different. So the first thing I want to talk about is zombies, obviously. But if I can find that mouse. Sorry. This way.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
He'll hear you.
Here he comes now. I'm getting out of here.
Joey!
So, I want to point out that I want you guys to be interactive, so I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. It would be helpful if you guys talk back. So, does anyone recognize that movie, first of all? Yes, it's the original Night of the Living Dead, 1968, by George A. Romero. So, does anyone know where the origin of the zombie myth comes from? I've talked to a few people specifically, but does anyone know the fundamental basis of where it comes from?
Haiti?
What?
Is it from Haiti?
Yes, it is. There are some religious things beforehand, but then it got really popular in Haiti. And it really started out as a slave metaphor. It was taught that voodoo could raise people from the dead, put them back to work, and the masters could continue to take the money from them and earn off of them. So essentially, for the slaves, it became a myth of even if you die, it's not an escape. They'll bring you back. But George A. Romero had a little bit of a different idea about what he should do with it. So George A. Romero redefined it, and actually what you saw in the background was the first contemporary zombie. So when you think about zombies nowadays, what do you guys think of? Think of brains,
Take over
anything else?
Take over the world.
They take over the world? Well, there are many things. First of all, I would like to point out that the brain thing is actually a misconception. There's only one movie series that I've found thus far that talks about them eating brains. And it's the Return of the Living Dead series. And that is it's considered the B branch of movies. It's like the ridiculous cousin of all the zombie movies, which sounds weird because they're B movies to begin with. But it doesn't make any sense for them to eat brains, because the only way to destroy a zombie is to destroy the brain. So if they eat all the brains, they can't bring anyone else back. Defeats the purpose. So, what I want to talk about now is the contemporary zombie, which is still being weird, so we're going to do it this way. And this is criteria that was determined by a person who wrote their master's thesis on zombies. And these are some of the criteria that are required for a contemporary or modern-day zombie. So I'm going to go through them. The first is ambiguous creation. And that stems from even Night of the Living Dead, where you think you may know where they come from, but they never really explain it. And that's a critical part of these movies, these books, these blogs, insane amounts of popularity, right? The next thing is that they're autonomous, and that's completely different than the Haitian myth. They aren't being controlled by somebody else. This is just zombies going around, they hear a noise, they follow the noise. Essentially, they are the mindless corpse in this concept. The next thing is that they're reproductive. Now, I don't mean in the fact that they're getting down. I mean in the fact that it takes a bite or an infection or some other way to create a new zombie. So, the next part is feudal cannibalism. And this is actually the concept that they're driven by this innate need to eat and to feed, but it does nothing for them. They don't gain any nutrients, they don't live longer, it's just they feed. And they have an overwhelming desire to do it. The next concept is fragile reanimation. And all that means is that, yes, they're back from the dead, but you can still kill them. I mean, think about it honestly. Who here watches The Walking Dead? On average, how many zombies do they kill per episode? Yeah, it's like around 10-ish, I think, or something like that. But one by one, you can destroy them. You hit the brain, they're gone. They're fragile, relatively thin. The next part, and this is where we're going to start talking a lot about the themes later on, but it's something called the subsequent threat. And the subsequent threat just means that, yes, the zombies are a threat, but in almost every story, they're not the big bad guy. it's always humanity versus humanity in these situations. The zombies are the initial catalyst of everything going to hell, and then after that, people are being people and being dumb. So before we go on, I want to kind of point out that there are going to be some things, some clips that I might show that might be somewhat inappropriate, and I might curse because I get all excited about it, but I'm just warning you. So this next one, and it lost its place, but that's cool. I'll skip to it. Oh, seriously? Let's kill it. Okay, this is actually from that series I mentioned before. This is Return of the Living Dead 2. Straight up days. And this is going to get into what I want to talk about next, which is the causes of the zombie throughout the modern contemporary times. Yeah, so for those of you who can't see this, this is a kid who's essentially going to explore a drainage ditch. And that is a military drill, and he's about to take down the drill. This is from the 80s, so he's about to flip on to take a picture of it. And then, in true B-movie glory, we get introduced to one of the most famous zombies from the series, if he ever shows up. So, like I said, this is from that movie series where they do eat brains. That's actually Tarman. He's quite famous. So, I want to kind of talk about the causes, because as you can see clearly there, that was a military drum, right? So, for the people, I think a few people said they saw Night of the Living Dead, the original. Can anyone remember, it's kind of alluded to, what causes the zombies? Anyone? Okay. Well, how about this? What if I say it was made in 1968 and reflected a little bit of the public sphere?
Nuclear.
The Russians is close.
Nuclear leak.
The nuclear stuff came in a little later. But think about what happened in 1969. Anyone?
Man on the moon.
Man on the moon.
Man on the moon.
There we go. So space exploration. It's said in the movie, like, as they're kind of pulling up, because in the original Night of the Living Dead, they're essentially hanging out in this cabin in suburban Pennsylvania. And they kind of get this radio broadcast, and it just says they think the this outbreak was caused by a probe with special radiation that returned from Venus. And that's all you get. But it's important to note that that is it's capturing the people's fear about the current times and what's going on. Because what you'll see throughout the next 50 years of zombies is that it always seems to be captured by whatever the people are afraid of at that time. And that's important to know. So, let's talk about, Night of the Living Dead was the late 60s. Zombie movies, to my chagrin, went way down in the 70s. It kind of took a while for them to build up a critical mass. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. But for the most part, it was some returns to the actual voodoo and some magic. There were some sequels, like Dawn of the Dead. The original was made in the 70s. But then the 80s is where zombie movies really kind of picked back up again. And the primary causes were, as we said before, nuclear waste, nuclear radiation, things that were currently going on. If you can think about the current time of what's going on at that time in the world, Cold War, Chernobyl type stuff, all that kind of things are going on. It's a very common cause. The same thing with the height of the Cold War being a military effort. People didn't know what was going on behind closed doors, so it allowed the filmmakers to tie into that with the causes of the zombies. The 90s, again, it kind of toned down a little bit. There's again some more remakes, some old rehashes, not much going on. There's a remake of the original Night of the Living Dead, which is a little better, or not better, has a little different tone. But then the 2000s, and this is where it's really hit popularity. Obviously, The Walking Dead is in the late 2000s. I'll say 28 Days Later, even though it's not a zombie movie. Anyone want to know why, or anyone want to argue with me on that one? No? Cool.
Why
But
is it that?
they're alive. The people are alive. And you don't have to kill them in the brain. They don't really infect by the normal way. They don't really behave in the normal, stereotypical contemporary zombie. Because if you see several scenes, they shoot them in the chest, they die, they're just gone. But what's important to note about that is that now we're talking about viruses. All of the most recent contemporary things, with the exception of Zombieland being spoiled bad food, they deal with viruses of some sort. So that kind of makes sense. The bird flu, H1N1, all those kinds of things were common in the culture. HIV is still really big, obviously. All these things are going on. And then from then, it's even shifted further. And now, there are stories, for example, I brought crops. This book actually has zombies created by the interaction of two different vaccines that were gene delivery methods. So they tried to cure cancer in this book, and it mutated and turned people into zombies. Cool. But also, there's been things of prions, and there's a few other special cases. But for the most part, it's still things that are going on somewhat in society now. And a lot of these, again, are back to from the military perspective. Overwhelmingly, the most amount of literature put out is by military officers writing about zombies, which I think is interesting. But, so now you know where, or what a zombie is and kind of where it came from. But out of the people who do partake in zombie movies, watch The Walking Dead, why do you watch it? What's interesting about it to you?
It's like end time questions. What do you do when the world ends?
Anybody else?
Survival.
Survival? So, it's perfect that we're talking about Walking Dead because I have a clip. So this is one of the great examples of what would you do scenario.
I'm sorry.
So this is Shane, bigger guy's bonus. They went on a run to get medical supplies to save a kid. They're both wounded and they weren't going to be able to escape. So Shane pulls out his gun, shoots the other dude in the thigh, and then takes some medical supplies and leaves. I have a hard time for anyone watching that scene and not going, well, what would I do if it were my kid? What would you do if it were your best friend's kid? What would you do if it were your spouse? This kind of ties into that. And the survival aspect of it, what would you do? Wow, that's going to be really bright, so that's good. I'm just going to close that off. That's literally on my slides. I just wanted to talk. So what would you do? How would you react? What would you do in this scenario? Are your morals absolute, or are they relative? For example, okay, so I'm going to go back to The Walking Dead for one more time, but who here is watching it? Just raise your hand so I know. Okay. Do you think the governor is inherently a terrible person?
I think that based on what some of the other characters have said about the governor, I think he's probably a good person. But when his daughter became a walker, spoilers, when his daughter became a walker, it probably really changed him and changed his perspective on the outbreak towards not so much like we have to live for humans and annihilate all the zombies, but more like some type of rehabilitation needs to happen or something. And then he kind of completely just went into anything threatens my goal of rejuvenating my daughter, then I would just stop that.
See, and personally, I read the comics, so I think he's inherently a terrible person, and it just gave him an excuse to be a terrible person. But that's what I like about the zombie stuff, is that you start putting yourself in the shoes of, what would I do? Why would I do it? And it's one of the few situations where it's not necessarily a right or wrong issue anymore. It's a would you survive situation. And for the people who don't know, the governor's the bad guy this season. They have a camp and he kind of is a dictator. Sorry, didn't explain. But, so with that, it allows you to evaluate those decisions and how terrible, what would you do to protect what you consider you and yours? And I think, and I'm going to talk about this in a little more depth, but for the most part, George Romero said that the reason he thought zombies were scary, and his exact words were, zombies are us. They are us. There's nothing, they're not a vampire that was transformed and has a demon soul. They are your loved ones brought back. And because of that, it allows you to get whatever you want out of them. Going somewhat back to the slave metaphor, but they're a tool to analyze whatever you want to analyze. So, for example, the original Night of the Living Dead, it stars a African-American person as the first, or not one of the first truly heroes in the 60s. He was the hero of a horror movie. And that was a big deal. And George Romero says that he just did it because he was the best actor. But all the people who took it in the crowd thought that it was a profound comment on race. And if you haven't seen Night of the Living Dead, he is the hero. He's the only one in the house to actually survive till the end. And as soon as it's kind of cleared out, a bunch of rednecks come and he walks out and they shoot him. And it was a very profound commentary for the people in public because it was essentially a lynching on TV or on a movie screen. But then, you know, he wasn't really necessarily using it that way, but it was interpreted that way. And a lot of these zombie type things you'll see is that they're not, a lot of them have intentional themes, but a lot of them, people watch them later and then see a theme that goes through. So kind of just going through time, the next one that comes off my head is considered to be the greatest movie, the second they're tied, is the original Dawn of the Dead. So this takes place in a mall. A bunch of people, it's like 2 news reporters and 2 SWAT members, go to a mall to survive. A lot of you may have seen the remake, which is a little different, but for the most part, that movie is straight up all about commercialism. All about how, as Americans, we're consumers. Even the zombies in that are consumers. All they want to do is eat. And for the people in the mall, all they're doing is trying to survive, but for some reason they think the best place to go is to a mall, which is just a comment on our society as a whole, is that's where we feel safe now. Another issue that's really developed in that movie is racism. There's a scene where he's shooting the zombies and he's deliberately picking out the black and Hispanic zombies and yelling profanities about them. And it's kind of what we were talking about before, is that you see all these characters in these stories become whatever they were before. They may have kept it behind, but now society's gone, so nothing's stopping them. And what the point is showing is just that these people, you have these issues inherently in our society, and we need to address them. And you can do that with a zombie, and you can kill zombies without anyone, you know, raising a fuss. But you start calling people bigots, they tend to react. So then the next thing I want to kind of jump to is the issue of classism. And this is really shown in World War Z, which is having a movie coming out that looks terrible. But the original book is an amazing book, and I encourage everyone to read it. But it deals heavily with classism and ethics. And so in the book, I'm going to spoil everything, but they survive, because it's an anthology, it's past. They survive, but they say that in order to rebuild, they need people who can do carpentry and can build things and build weapons and do all this other stuff. But the people that survived initially were ad executives, were lawyers, were all this other stuff. So there's this whole section on this book about people having to retrain and how they resented it so much that they fought back. And what you see in a lot of this is that people fighting back against other people in some sort of rebellion. In that case, the prime example from that book is that a woman freaks out during her retraining ceremony because she was being retrained to, I think, pick up like garbage worker kind of thing. And she got pissed off because she was being trained by her former maid. And she was like a movie star. And these are the kind of things that you get to deal with because it doesn't happen in real life, right? Like, our society is set up a way that it keeps advancing the way it is. It doesn't really change inherently from the bottom. So that's that. And then the next part I wanted to talk about was just, we talked a little bit about the sacrifices that you're willing to make, but at what scale? Okay, so we talked about that. Okay, Shane was willing to kill Otis for medicine for a kid. Would you do the same thing to save a community? How many people would you kill to save a community? That's why I brought up the governor, because the governor wants to kill everyone just to protect his community. Well, in books like World War Z, they're willing to sacrifice half the country to save America. They retreat everybody back to California and to the west of the Rockies. And then they deliberately stock all these people's communities and outposts with food just to draw zombies to them and away from what they retreated to. That's that whole thing is the general way that they sacrificed in order to beat zombies in that story. So it allows us as a people to evaluate, well, at what point in time is this war worth it, or is this plan worth it? What kind of things? It allows us to view it with a detachment that we're not in the situation, that we're not emotionally compromised by the situation. And then, I don't know how much time I have. Someone go 2-3 more minutes? Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is a common theme throughout zombie everything, is technology. So what you'll commonly see is, okay, maybe somebody saw Shaun of the Dead, right? Okay. Can you describe to me how we first hear about the outbreak? He's watching TV. Does anyone remember that? No, he's deliberately not watching the news, right? He's sitting there being a consumer and just going flip, 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 flip. But as he's doing it, the filmmaker made all the words match up to say that the dead have risen, or something like that. You must destroy their brains. And that's just him flipping. It's like one word per channel. And it's commentary on how, yes, we're so interconnected. We get so much news. We have so much going on. But no one really pays attention to it. No one really cares. And then as soon as stuff falls to shit, then we go back and say, no, medicine will cure it for us. They will fix it. So I'm going to go to The Walking Dead real quick, but the CDC episode, where they go to the CDC. First of all, I can show you the comics. It's not in here. And it's considered to be the worst Walking Dead episode. It is terrible, in my opinion. Maybe that's because I'm a scientist and I know that you can't measure neural activity using an MRI like that, actively, while somebody's being shot in the head. Maybe. But the people in the story are so reliant. There's always, I can go on and on about there's always one character that does this, but there's always a character that is clinging to the past in zombie stories. And that is almost always what gets them killed. They stuck to gender roles, and that's what got them killed. They only thought technology would be the way to go out, and that's the way that got them killed. It's all of these things that you see throughout these stories is that people are clinging to what they know, and it doesn't work out for them. So in the technology sense, you'll see the stories deliberately have people ignoring technology until it's convenient. And then the military is going to come, they're going to have this huge tent, they're going to have doctors, there's going to be a vaccine, we're going to cure everything, it's going to be perfect again. And it never works out that way, but it's a common trend. And then, I think we're pretty much wrapping up. So, I guess my moral of the whole story is that the reason it resonates, for the most part, at least with me, is that it's an issue of the unknown. We are afraid of the unknown, but the treatment's unknown in most of these stories, how it was caused, why it's happening, who can get bit, who gets infected, it's all pretty much random. And I think inherently we have a fear of things being random and not knowing what's going on. And with that, I will leave that with, we are the Walking Dead.